Mr. Carlin, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
In the history of North Korea, what do the purges of number two men indicate about the regime stability?
I think we want to answer that at two levels. First of all, the assumption is that Jang was the number two man. I don't know that that's true. I think we may have blown him up in our own minds to be more important in some ways than he was, certainly to Kim Jong-un. Secondly, in one sense, there is never any number two in my mind. The number two is certainly not a successor. He's not a replacement. He's just possibly the man who the leader relies on sometimes for advice or to help control the situation. I think Jang was always in a precarious situation. My sense was that the fact that his wings had been clipped twice by Kim Jong-il meant that his position, even under Kim Jong-un, was never as firm as outsiders thought it might be. So his disappearance, to me, was not a surprise. I didn't know it would be as dramatic as it was. But sooner or later, I had the feeling he was going to disappear.
Were you surprised at Kim Jong-un's decision to execute his uncle and close political mentor in the way he did?
I guess I was surprised. We didn't have precedent for that in some ways, and therefore, as analysts, we rely a lot on what we know to be the case in the past. And we anticipate that it'll be repeated. And so in this case, he broke with precedent, certainly precedent of the last 40, 50 years. So that much of it was a surprise, yeah.
It's still very murky when you try to figure out where North Korea is going. I was wondering, what would be the options left for Kim Jong-un based on the past experiences after this kind of very dramatic developments?
Since this is to some extent unprecedented, we don't really have a sense on how quickly things are going to settle down again. And he may not even know, as a matter of fact. Presumably they took more care in preparing for this move than was apparent on the outside. So that to us, it looks as if this was very sudden, and therefore it must have rearranged the furniture very quickly. It may not have been that way. It may have been that they watched, they pulled files, they looked at the people who they thought might be affected, and they got themselves ready. The dust has to settle a little bit, but look at how quickly Kim Jong-un went out to do on-site guidance after this. Look at how quickly they had a meeting with the South Koreans just today, as a matter of fact, in Kaesong. And it's a meeting that seems to have gone rather well. Look at how quickly they sent somebody out to meet with the Associated Press to talk about how the economic situation would stay the same. So I suspect that they had a script already prepared for how they were going to try to rebalance the situation rather quickly so that people would forget about this. Will people forget about this as quickly as they hope? I don't know. I mean, that's the interesting gamble that they took.
Some people, including South Korean military specifically, I think, are concerned about potential North Korean provocations, especially when they do something very serious movements or decisions domestically. Then they time to time make provocations against South Korea. What's your thoughts on that?
You know, I've been doing this a long time, and I cannot think of a time when we have connected internal developments with provocations. I'd like to see someone explain to me the past examples of that, first of all. And second of all, it seems to me that if we're not careful, we could end up provoking the North Koreans through our own words and actions. Rather than take this quietly and say we're watching it, we in Washington and in Seoul are watching this carefully. We understand this is a serious development, and we're prepared for, any eventuality, and just leave it at that. Instead, the rhetoric on our side has gotten sort of hot, and has gotten a little bit provocative, I think. So we have to watch to see how the North Koreans respond to it.
Let's talk about the book, Two Koreas, which you co-authored. You covered the last 13 years in the book. And what were the most important developments in North Korea you tried to put emphasis on in the book?
I think there were 2, maybe 3 main themes that ran through those chapters. The first is how the high point in DPRK-U.S. relations, which was reached at the end of 2000, simply plummeted down beginning in 2001 and have never recovered from that. And the question is, why did they plummet that way? Why couldn't someone stop it from going so fast and so deep in the hole? And why haven't we been able to climb out of it? I think one of the lessons that I drew from this was that the normal perception of the agreed framework, the agreement we had with the North Koreans in October 1994, the normal perception is that the agreed framework failed. And everything we've done with the North Koreans since then has failed. And therefore, either it's worthless to try to do anything, or whatever we do with them has to be so carefully hedged and formulated that it's almost impossible to move ahead. The history doesn't bear that out. The history really underlines that the United States government took a series of steps in 2001 and 2002 which really undermined the agreed framework. And it wasn't an accident. It's because there were people in the Bush administration, senior officials, who did not like the agreed framework and wanted to discard it. And they succeeded. The problem was, after they discarded the agreed framework, they didn't have anything to replace it with. They left a vacuum. And into that vacuum stepped the North Korean nuclear weapons program.
Then do you think Jang Song-taek's execution has significant impact on China's existing approach to North Korea problems?
Too soon to tell. We know what the Chinese have said in the interim. I think it'd be interesting to know if there are people in Beijing who think to themselves, whoops, we put too much of a bet on Jang Song-taek. We relied on him too much, and now he's not there. And so who do we have to deal with? Kim Jong-un. The Chinese are going to have to recalculate how they're going to communicate with the regime now. And I'm sure they'll do it effectively. They know how to do it, but it may take them a little while.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Carlin.
My pleasure. Glad to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.